of the stock has a put option. So a put option, notice, gives a lot of control over whether the transaction occurs or not to the person who has the stock and might want to sell it. And with the contract, they always have the right to sell their stock at $50 per share. But notice they don't have to go through with that arrangement unless it is to their advantage. If they find a better deal somewhere else, they can sell the stock there and ignore this contract. They only have to sell if they wish to do so in this situation. So what we've looked at are two basic types of options that exist in the market, and those are the only two types that are really out there and available that are of concern to us here. Notice, though, that in each of the contracts, there were two people involved. One person who might be buying stock and one person who might be selling stock. The real difference between the two contracts is who's in control. Who decided whether that transaction could occur or not? In the call option was the person who might be buying stock. In the put contract, the control was in the hands of the person who would be selling the stock. So that's why we have two different contracts with two different kinds of situations in which control is given to different parties involved. Now, you can arrange these types of transactions between yourself and any other investor. Again, who is willing to agree to the terms similar to the ones we outlined here? However, there are advantages to investors using what we call here a standardized or listed option. Now, that is the type that we're going to focus on in our program today. What we're going to look at is contracts that trade on option exchanges such as the Chicago Board Options Exchange, CBOE, as well as many other options exchanges, and there are several others that exist around the country. These types of contracts, again, are called standardized or listed options. The values or terms of the contract can't be anything that we would like. They are standardized and can only take on certain values that are permitted by the exchange on which the options are traded. So let's take a look at one of these and consider the following contract. In this example, we have an option, in this case a call option described as XYZ January 50 call. Now the first component here is the name of the stock involved, XYZ. This is called the underlying stock. Now we assume that if you have such a contract and you remember you have the right to buy this stock if you own this contract, that you will have the right to buy one round lot, that is 100 shares of the underlying stock. So that is the assumption that we make with one standard option contract. The next component is a date. And notice it says January. That's the expiration date. As of the expiration date, this contract would be null and void, and the person who owned the call would no longer have the right to buy the stock. So you have to use this right if you choose to do so before this expiration date. Now, the actual expiration date is a detail that you should learn from reading your manual. We won't go into those details here, but suffice it to say that this expiration date is about the middle of the month. The third feature of the contract is a price, in this case, 50. Now, this is called the strike price. The striking price or the exercise price. Now, we'll be talking about this term quite a bit, so we're going to use an abbreviation for this particular figure, XP. Think of exercise price when you think of this particular symbol. Now, this describes the amount that you would have to pay in dollars per share if you decided that you wanted to go through with this particular contract. So it's going to be this price in dollars times the number of the underlying shares. So altogether, to buy the stock in this particular contract, you would have to pay $5,000. But we usually think of the exercise price as the price per share that you would be paying to go through with this contract. Now finally, we are told that this contract is a call option. This is the type of option, and there are only two types of options, the call contract, which we have here, and the put contract. Now each contract, as we saw, involves two parties, one of whom might be buying the stock and the other who might be selling stock. The contract will only be completed, though, if the person who has the right to decide goes through with that right. Now we're going to be referring to these parties quite a bit in our discussion, and so we have to have some vocabulary to describe who they are, and we also have to understand basic definitions of their rights in the contract, and that they are required to do so. It's important for us to review those ideas. Now, since each type of option then involves two parties in the contract, one of whom might be buying stock and the other of whom might be selling, if the deal goes through. In the case of the call option, the person who has the right to buy the stock is said to be the owner of the call. And when you think of this, when you think the owner of the call, you should immediately be able to think, these are the people who have the right to buy. These are the key terms here, a right to buy stock, and what they have a right to buy in this example is 100 shares of XYZ at $50 a share until the January expiration. So there must be someone, if they decide that they want this right now and they want the stock, which should provide the stock on demand. Now, this person would have an obligation to sell. So notice, for a right to buy, there has to correspond to that an obligation to sell the stock. We would call this person the writer of the call. Now, unfortunately, as it turns out, these are not the only terms that apply to the person who has the right to buy and the person who has the obligation to sell. One of the things that you'll have to get used to in this area is to be able to use several different terms interchangeably. And that's just one of the things that occurs in this industry. The vocabulary has been developed that has a lot of different terms that are really synonymous. So we need to be familiar with all the terms and use them interchangeably. So, for example, the owner of the call, the person who has the right to buy, is also known as the buyer of the call, the holder of the call, the purchaser of the call, or is said to be long a call or to have a long call. Now, all of these terms are interchangeable, and so if you see a term and you're not very comfortable with it, let's say long call, and you have a better understanding of what owner of the call means, then substitute one for the other. For example, mentally, while you're reading through a problem, you could use these things interchangeably. Now, the writer of the call is also referred to by several different terms. The writer of the call is said to be the seller of the call, or they're said to be short a call, or to have a short call. And again, these terms are interchangeable. Sometimes writer is often the clearest term, so if you see any other term, simply substitute the writer of the call for those and think that this is the person who has the obligation to sell stock in this situation. Now notice that there are not two different types of calls here. Even though we see a long call and a short call, really there is just one call. The long and short simply refer to the two people who are involved in the contract. The person who is long the call is the person with the right to buy stock, and the person who is short the call is the writer of the call, and they have the obligation to sell the stock. So we need to think about those terms and what they really mean whenever we see them in a problem on the exam. Now, as with call options, there are two participants in each put option contract as well. But who owns the contract in the case of a put option? Well, that's the person who has a right to sell the stock. Notice that the owner of the put is the person with the option, meaning the person who has a right to do something. In this case, a right to sell 100 shares of XYZ at $50 per share until January expiration. So what we have to do to associate then, these terms, owner of the put and the right to sell. Now, if this person does want to sell the stock, to whom is the stock sold? Well, there must be someone who is obligated to buy the stock on demand.